I struggled with constipation my entire life, from childhood and after years of symptoms, bloating, discomfort, and never feeling like my gut worked the way it should. I finally had a colonoscopy at 21 years old, and my doctor came back and told me that nothing was wrong. I remember sitting there feeling dismissed, unheard, frustrated, because I knew something was wrong. I knew in my body that something was wrong. I had lived in my body my entire life. I knew that this wasn't normal. And the most invasive diagnostic tool my GI doctor had available came back completely clean. Everything was normal. And what I didn't know then, and what I want to share with you today, is that a normal colonoscopy was never going to find what was actually driving my symptoms in the first place. Not because the test was wrong, but because it was looking in the wrong place entirely. Let me explain. And if this sounds familiar, this video is for you. And before we get right into it, I have a free training and a free quiz linked at the top of the description that go even deeper after this video. Both are designed to help you figure out exactly where your gut is breaking down and what your specific next step should be. More of those at the end, so let's go. I'm Erin Harner, Integrative Registered Dietitian Nutritionist specializing in gut health and chronic constipation. I work specifically with women who have been living with IBS-C for years after cycling through every standard recommendation without lasting results. And this is the first video dedicated in a series I'm building specifically for women with IBS-C, because this diagnosis deserves its own conversation, not generic gut health advice that was never designed for your specific body. Now, let me start with what an IBS-C diagnosis actually tells you and what it doesn't. IBS-C is called a diagnosis of exclusion. Basically, what this means is that your doctor, hopefully, has used available testing to rule out other conditions. Things like inflammatory bowel disease, like Crohn's or colitis, colorectal cancer, structural abnormalities, and what's left, the unexplained pattern of constipation, bloating, abdominal discomfort, and more, gets labeled as IBS-C. The colonoscopy will rule out structural disease. Blood work rules out obvious systemic abnormalities. And then you get a label, IBS-C. And with that label comes a standard trio of recommendations. Eat more fiber, drink more water, and take a laxative. And then you go home. So here's a problem, and I really want you to hear this. None of those investigations looked at your gut motility in any depth. None of them assessed your microbiome. None of them evaluated your nervous system's role in your digestive process. None of them considered your circadian rhythm and meal timing patterns. And none of them investigated the specific mechanisms the research shows us are actually driving IBS-C. The diagnosis names the symptom pattern. It does not explain why that pattern is happening in your specific body. And I really like to ask the question, why? And that gap between naming the condition and actually finding its drivers is exactly where most women with IBS-C stay completely stuck. And sadly, sometimes this is for years and sometimes it's for decades. It's not that your doctor doesn't care, it's that the conventional medical system isn't set up to look for these things. And until someone actually looks for them, you're going to get the same recommendations that haven't worked. Now, I want to get specific about why the standard trio of fiber and water and a laxative consistently fails women with IBS-C. Because it's not just that it doesn't work, it's that IBS-C is a fundamentally different situation than simple constipation. And advice designed for a straightforward, sluggish gut doesn't translate to IBS-C very well, for three specific reasons. First is the fiber trap. This is what I call the fiber paradox, and it hits IBS-C harder than almost any other population. An already sensitive, dysregulated gut responds to sudden increases in fiber with more gas, more bloating, more pressure, and more backup, not less. Generic eat more fiber advice assumes a gut with a normal baseline function. IBS-C doesn't have that baseline, and adding more fiber to a system that's not ready for it is like adding cars to a highway that's already at a complete standstill. Second, motility isn't a volume problem. Fiber and water add bulk and softness to stool, but if the gut's motility signals are dysregulated, which current research confirms is a core feature of IBS-C, adding volume to a system that isn't contracting properly doesn't get things moving. It creates more pressure and more discomfort in the gut that's already overwhelmed. And third, visceral hypersensitivity changes everything. Women with IBS-C experience normal amounts of gas, pressure, and gut activity more intensely than people without IBS-C. Research shows that the majority of IBS patients have altered visceral perception compared to healthy subjects. Basically, this means that the gut-to-brain signal is amplified. Your gut isn't overreacting. Your nervous system is dialed up, and standard advice doesn't account for that at all, which is why it doesn't help, and why it sometimes makes things dramatically worse, not better. I have a constipation video that I'll link in this playlist where I walk through 4 root cause categories that drive chronic constipation. Every single one of these root causes directly and specifically applies to IBS-C. And current peer-reviewed research backs this up explicitly. Let me walk you through each of these 4 root causes through the lens of IBS-C specifically. Root cause category number 1 for IBS-C is the physical foundation: fiber, hydration, and movement. These matter, but for IBS-C, the details are everything. Fiber is super essential, like I mentioned with the fiber paradox, but the type, the amount, and the sequence are what determines whether it helps or makes things dramatically worse. For most women with IBS-C, soluble fiber is what needs to come before insoluble fiber. Think oats, citrus fruits, sweet potatoes, cooked carrots, fiber that softens and holds onto water, rather than lots of raw vegetables, nuts, and seeds that add bulk and can be intensely irritating to a gut that's already inflamed and sensitive. And any increases in fiber need to be slow and deliberate, not a dramatic overhaul overnight, please. Next, hydration really matters, but water alone doesn't solve a motility signaling problem. Also, movement supports gut contractions. Even a short walk after meals has a genuine impact on motility. But just keep in mind that for IBS-C, movement is one piece of a much bigger picture that needs to be addressed simultaneously. The foundation is where you start, but it is almost never where IBS-C ends. Now let's talk about root cause number 2, which is the gut ecosystem. This is one of the most significant and commonly missed drivers of IBS-C. Current research is actually pretty clear on this. The gut microbiome composition is directly implicated in the pathophysiology of IBS-C. The microbiome influences motility, neurotransmitter synthesis, including serotonin, which you might know from my gut-brain video, is produced primarily in the gut. Also immune function and intestinal permeability. When the ecosystem is imbalanced, every single one of those functions is compromised simultaneously. And the most clinically significant piece in this category for IBS-C specifically is methane gas. Certain microbes in a dysbiotic gut produce methane as a byproduct of fermentation. And methane actively paralyzes the gut's peristaltic action to slow motility. And the slower things get, the more fermentation happens, the more methane is produced, and the worse the constipation becomes. This is like a self-reinforcing cycle that's now called intestinal methanogen overgrowth, and it is disproportionately associated with IBS-C. If you've been diagnosed with IBS-C and you also experience significant bloating and gas alongside the constipation, this is a mechanism that's worth investigating. A disrupted microbiome also drives food sensitivities and intestinal permeability, like foods that used to be tolerated that now cause food reactions. These aren't random, like new allergies or sensitivities. They're actually downstream signals from an ecosystem that's out of balance. And this is exactly why laxatives don't solve the problem. Yes, they help move stool through, they help soften stool, they help get it out, but they don't address the ecosystem. And in some cases, they actually make it much worse. The third root cause is structural and mechanical, and this is the category that a colonoscopy specifically cannot assess. Slow transit constipation, where the gut's motility capacity is genuinely reduced at a functional level, overlaps significantly with IBS-C. The muscles and nerves that are responsible for the wave-like contractions that move stool through the intestines aren't firing properly. This is a function problem that no amount of fiber or water can correct, because the issue isn't the stool itself, the issue is moving the stool through the system. The thyroid connection belongs here too, and it's one that most practitioners never make. Your thyroid regulates metabolic function throughout your entire body, including motility in your gut. When your thyroid's underperforming, which is disproportionately common in women, everything gets low and slow. And I have a full video on the thyroid and constipation connection, so be sure to check that out. But if you haven't had a complete thyroid panel, not just TSH, but free T3, free T4, reverse T3, and thyroid antibodies, that's worth raising with your doctor. And pelvic floor dysfunction or pelvic dyssynergia is another mention here for women with IBS-C who are straining but producing soft-ish type 4 Bristol stool. If the stool feels like it's there, but it's not coming out properly, that's often a muscular coordination issue, not a motility issue. The pelvic floor muscles aren't releasing properly. I actually have a full video on this as well, so be sure to check it out. Root cause category number 4 is the one that most distinctly separates IBS-C from slow transit constipation, for example. And it's the one that most practitioners never investigate at all: the nervous system and rhythm disruption. Let me start with what makes IBS-C neurologically a little bit different. Research shows that the gut-brain communication highway via the vagus nerve that carries approximately 80% of its signals from the gut up to the brain, your gut is constantly reporting upward. When your gut's inflamed, when it's backed up, and when it's dysregulated, those are the distress signals going up. And your brain responds with fatigue, anxiety, brain fog, low mood. And if you have IBS-C and you've been dealing with anxiety or exhaustion alongside your digestive symptoms, that is one connected system sending one signal, not 3 separate problems. But in IBS-C, something else is actually happening as well. Research has documented what's called HPA axis dysregulation in IBS. This is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and that governs the stress response. In IBS-C, the stress system itself is altered. Chronic stress doesn't just temporarily suppress digestion the way it does in a healthy gut. It actually creates a sustained pattern of nervous system dysregulation that keeps the gut in a chronically suppressed state. And unfortunately, layered on top of that is visceral hypersensitivity, which I mentioned earlier, but I want to return to here because it's so important for IBS-C specifically. The nerves lining your gut are more reactive. Normal gut sensations, things like gas and pressure and normal motility, are actually perceived as more intense, more uncomfortable, and sometimes painful. This is not anxiety. This is not sensitivity. This is an altered neurological state that is documented in research and that requires a completely different approach than standard constipation treatment. And here's what this means practically for you. Before you add interventions, more fiber, more supplements, more protocols, your nervous system needs to feel safe enough to let your gut function properly. That's not just like a woo-woo concept, it's physiology. Digestion runs on the parasympathetic nervous system. Rest and digest. And a nervous system that's stuck in chronic dysregulation is never giving your gut the signal it needs to do its job. Then there's circadian rhythm. Your gut clock is driven not by lightness and darkness, but by when food arrives. Consistent meal timing creates digestive preparedness in the gut. Your gut starts preparing for food before it even arrives. For IBS-C, an already dysregulated gut is even more sensitive to schedule disruptions, erratic eating, poor sleep, and inconsistency in your lifestyle. This is why symptoms can feel really random. It's why they can feel worse on the weekends, worse during travel, worse during stressful periods. It's not random. It's actually your gut clock responding to rhythm disruptions in a nervous system that doesn't have much resilience to spare. Your window of tolerance is too small. So this is what I want you to take away from everything I just shared. IBS-C is a multi-system issue. All 4 root cause categories are typically involved simultaneously. And that's not discouraging, it's actually clarifying. Because it explains why simple fixes like drink more water, take some fiber, take a laxative have never worked for you. You can't fiber max your way out of a nervous system problem. You can't laxative your way out of microbiome imbalances and dysregulation. You can't hydrate your way out of slow transit. You need a framework that addresses all 4 root causes together in the right order in a way that's sustainable inside your real life. And that's why I developed the Gut Rhythm Method. It's the foundation of my program, the Gut Rhythm Reset. For IBS-C specifically, sequence matters more than just about anything else. The nervous system piece has to come first because a dysregulated nervous system won't let your gut respond to even the best nutrition interventions. And then comes the physical foundation, built carefully and slowly so you're not triggering that fiber paradox we talked about. Then comes the ecosystem work to restore the resilience of the gut microbiome. We build capacity. And then there's targeted investigation of anything structural that remains. Rhythm first, capacity building second, and then targeted investigation third. That is the path that actually works for IBS-C, and it's available to you. So this is the first video in my dedicated IBS-C series because I believe women with IBS-C deserve content that speaks specifically to their situation, not watered down generic gut health advice that was never designed for a sensitive, dysregulated gut. Coming up in this playlist, you'll see dedicated videos on the IBS-C and microbiome connection, the nervous system and IBS-C in depth, and what the path to lasting relief actually looks like, and more. Hit subscribe so you don't miss them as they come out. And if you've been living with IBS-C and you want to understand specifically which of these 4 root cause categories is most relevant for your body, right now, I have 2 free resources that can help you figure it out. The first is my training called Still Bloated and Backed Up. It walks you through the 3 gut rhythm mistakes I see women make all the time with chronic constipation and IBS-C and exactly what to do about them. It's the best place to start if you want a really clear picture of what's keeping you stuck. Again, the link is at the top of the description. Also in the description is my gut clarity quiz. It's a 2-minute assessment to help you identify where your specific rhythm is breaking down and what your next step could actually be. And after either one, if working together feels like the next right step, you can book a gut clarity call with me to talk through a personalized plan for your specific situation. And if this video finally gave you language for something you've been experiencing for years, give it a like and subscribe to my channel so you can catch the next video in the playlist. I'll talk to you soon.